This is Block 9, The Liberal Establishment, Section 2, Camelot, with the section John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was born in 1917, the second son of Joseph Kennedy, who had made quite a fortune rum running during Prohibition. He was a salesman of illegal alcohol, heavily involved with the mob and all those sorts of people. Joseph Kennedy turned his wealth and his personality into political connections all throughout, centered in Boston, but all throughout New England, where he was a strong American isolationist and an American firster. He was actually Joseph Kennedy was actually the American ambassador to Great Britain in the early years of World War II, and constantly advised the United States that Great Britain would not survive against the Nazi onslaught. His oldest son was killed in the war, and so he turned to his second son as kind of the heir to what the family was supposed to be. And there was a lot of pressure on John Kennedy, or Jack as he was called. Jack went to Harvard, of course, as anybody who was anybody in Boston did. Went to Harvard, served in World War II in the Pacific, where he heroically saved his shipmates. He was the captain of a small naval craft, which got sunk, and he very heroically saved his shipmates and won a medal for bravery doing that. Injured his back seriously in that action, and his back would be a problem for Kennedy for the rest of his life. When he returned home after his brother had been killed, Kennedy's father created a political career for him instead of his older brother. He was elected to Congress in 1947. You see in the first picture of the upper right as a very young man. And he was elected to the Senate after 3 terms, 6 years later in 1953, with his father's vital support, pulling the strings in Massachusetts and New England to get his son elected to this political career. He was young, he was elegant, he was vibrant, he was very handsome. He was picked by the Democratic Party to be their standard bearer for the election of 1960. He ran against Eisenhower's Vice President Richard Nixon. That's who the GOP turned to in 1960. Nixon said, "I have all of this experience. I was a congressman longer than Kennedy. I've been Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years. Kennedy is young. Kennedy is inexperienced. Vote for me." He had stood up to Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, in a famous debate in the United States in 1959, where the two of them debated the merits of a capitalist system versus a command system. So the stage was set for Kennedy and Nixon to go at each other in the election of 1960. Kennedy was only the second Catholic to run for the presidency. And he had to deal with the old American bias against Catholicism. He gave a speech in which he said, no, the Pope is not going to be running the United States if I am President of the United States. And in the end, his Catholicism was awash. As many votes as it cost him in anti-Protestant parts of the country. Catholics who might have otherwise not voted up north around Boston and New England, went out and voted for Kennedy because he was Catholic. The televised debates in this election between Nixon and Kennedy marked a watershed moment in American political history. This was the first time that the candidates would be seen on television debating each other in a live format. Kennedy and his advisors made sure that Kennedy had makeup on, he looked good, he was ready for the television cameras. Nixon did not wish to do that. He considered such a thing kind of beneath his dignity. And when the two of them were on television, it became very clear that Kennedy looked a heck of a lot better than Nixon did. Nixon was not an old man. Kennedy was 43, and Nixon was only 47 years old, but he looked older. It was the evening. He had a 5 o'clock shadow on his face. He was not made up. He was sweaty, kind of under the lights of the debate, and Kennedy looked cool and calm and suave and collected, and all sorts of things like that. And people who watched the television debates between Nixon and Kennedy said that Kennedy clearly won. That the people who watched television said Kennedy had won. But people who had listened to the debates on radio who had not seen the difference between the two candidates, people who had listened to the debates on radio, said that Nixon had been the winner of the debate. It just gives a little bit of an interesting thing into what we expect out of people that we wish to be president of the United States. As it were, the election was one of the absolute closest in American history. The popular vote, Kennedy won the popular vote by less than 100,000, or around 100,000 votes out of 70 million cast, and it was 49.7 for Kennedy, 49.6 for Nixon. And what swung the balance was a handful of votes in Illinois and a handful of votes in Texas. If a few thousand votes in Illinois and Texas had gone the other way, Nixon would have been president and not Kennedy. From the outset, there was rumors of election fraud, that voting machines from Republican districts in Illinois mysteriously disappeared or ended up floating in the Chicago River, that felons and dead people were voting in Texas. Nixon chose not to challenge the results of the election. He said that such a challenge would really kind of rip the country apart, and so he decided to concede to Kennedy. Excuse me. He decided to concede to Kennedy rather than fight a long, drawn-out, and potentially very, very bloody and nasty recount or challenge in the courts. So Kennedy became president. He gave a famous inaugural address in 1961 and proceeded to be the youngest man ever elected to that office. Not the youngest man to hold the office. Teddy Roosevelt was 42 when he became president, but he became president when McKinley was killed. Kennedy is the youngest man to be voted president. He was 43 years old when he was elected in 1960. The press loved Kennedy. And in time, his administration would come to be known as Camelot. Now, it was not known as Camelot during his administration. It was started to be referred to that after he had been killed. But Kennedy seems, at least, young and vibrant. He's definitely young. He seems vibrant. And the press had a love affair with John Kennedy and his entire family that has continued until this very day. After his death, he was compared to King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. The family, the press ran these, stories on his children, his daughter, his son, his beautiful, gorgeous society wife, Jacqueline Bouvier. Bouvier was her maiden name, from an old, rich family that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. There's the Kennedy brothers. John throwing the football, his little brother, Bobby, catching it. Bobby Kennedy was made John's Attorney General in his early 30s at the time. His wife was gorgeous, he was good-looking, the family was big, the family was boisterous, the administration was staffed with some of the smartest people in America. The press loved them to the point where they covered up for the Kennedys all the time. The stage was set for what a lot of people imagined would be one of the greatest administrations in the history of the United States.